This book discusses the armed services editions that were handed out to U.S. troops in the Second World War. The book starts out with the book burnings in Germany in the 1930s under, well, you know what regime that is. Essentially, the argument is that the certain German regime, their hatred of literature, their burning of books was something that once the United States entered the Second World War, that they believed they could use as a propaganda tool, in effect by creating the concept of the book being more powerful than certain angry speeches. Now, this is fine as far as it goes. It gets us to the attempt to revitalize the various libraries that were constructed on various bases in the interwar period and during the First World War on various army bases, camps, etc. The way that this originally was going to be done was through, yes, a book drive. So a bunch of librarians got together and had a goal of managing to get their hands on 10 million books. Well, after some initial success, they discovered that it was a lot more difficult than they thought it would be, and they weren't quite going to get their 10 million total. One of the major New York publishers stepped in and said they would send them a bunch of copies. They realized there were drawbacks to this, the biggest drawback being that at that time, with the exception of Penguin, you really didn't have paperbacks. The idea of lugging a hardcover book through a war zone, well, that's not going to work, is it? So they needed a new way to package the books. They also needed to figure out the financial side of things. A bunch of New York publishers got together and they decided that they were going to create these armed services editions, which were printed on cheap paper, although there's some debate about that, with text blocks that were much more crammed in than before and produced in large print runs of 50, 60, 70,000, 80,000 copies and then distributed to the troops. They would be a 1 cent royalty to the publisher and a 1 cent royalty to the author. One of the publishers was willing to do it for free, but they didn't want to have to do multiple versions of the contract, which it's possible to understand why. This is all done in a pretty much straightforward narrative. Things get a little more complicated when we actually get to the war zone aspect, because there are some anecdotes of soldiers in hospitals reading these things or passing them around in frontline units, but there's not as much as I would have thought there was going to be. There's also quite a bit from one author's estate where she produced a lot of fan letters and answered them all and that kind of thing. With a book like this, I do tend to judge it on, would it be possible to summarize it in a magazine article and be done with it then? I'd say that there is more here than you could easily cover in a magazine article, and there is some archival research involved. If there's a flaw, it's that I would have liked more supporting information on it. The book seemed to be more focused on the bureaucracy. Much is made, for example, of them going back and forth on whether to print a book that was banned in Boston because of various reasons, eventually deciding to go ahead with it. One nice thing is that they were unwilling to boulderize books to take out language, sexual content, that kind of thing, when it was considered objectionable. There's a brief section on the GI Bill and how some who went on to get PhDs and the like pointed to these armed services editions as what got them started on their lifetime of reading and dealing with literature, which was interesting at least. Did I like the book? Yes. I'm always looking for unusual topics, and this certainly qualifies. Now, how often will I be rereading it? This is a solid 3 to 5 year I don't think I'll be reading it any sooner than that. It's when I need something a bit different about the Second World War that I'll be picking it up. If you enjoyed the review, as always, like, comment, and subscribe.